Good morning, everybody. Wow, geez, I didn't know I had that much power to calm down this robust crowd. Hey, everybody. I'm Phil Roos. I'm the Director of Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and I want to thank you all for attending the second annual My Healthy Climate Conference. I think a number of you were here last April when we had the inaugural conference. We had 600 people here, which seemed like a big turnout. We have 900 today, 50% bump, and I think, I think it exemplifies where we are in the climate movement and in our efforts to accelerate action in mitigating climate's impacts, and that's the theme of this conference today. I'm going to kick us off. I'm going to save some of the logistics for my colleague, Keith Cooley, who will be up in a minute. But I want to just give big thanks to all of you for being here. I want to thank the EGLE team, which includes, importantly, the Office of Climate and Energy, which was really driving this under the incredible leadership of Corey Connolly. For those who know Corey, let's give him a big round of applause. And big thanks to EGLE's events team, which is from our Environmental Support Division. Jim, Jennifer, Chrissy, Elena, and Joel, who made this all happen and continue to provide behind-the-scenes support and keeping us on time here. And they're right there watching me to make sure I'm doing just that. I also want to thank our conference sponsors, which include EGLE's Materials Management Division, the Michigan Departments of Agriculture and Rural Development, Transportation, Natural Resources, Health and Human Services, and Labor and Economic Opportunity, the Michigan Infrastructure Office, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the Michigan Community Service Commission, Let's Grow Michigan, Michigan State University Office of Sustainability, and the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. Let's give them a round of applause and thanks, too. And last but not least, I want to recognize two of EGLE's really important advisory councils. We have a number of advisory councils that advise us on different aspects of our work, and two of them are well represented here today because they played a central role in the development of the My Healthy Climate Plan and are now playing a key role in guiding EGLE and us statewide in the implementation of that plan. And those are the Council on Climate Solutions. I am proud to have been an inaugural member of that, and I get to be the chair of it now in my role as director of EGLE, so really proud of that. And then the Michigan Advisory Council for Environmental Justice. That group played, you don't know, for those who weren't behind the scenes, that group played an instrumental role in making sure that the climate efforts that we have as a state are centered in equity and justice. And I want to give particular thanks to them, but to both groups for all of their efforts. So, on behalf of EGLE, the state of Michigan, and all of our partners, I want to say how truly grateful we are that you're all here at this critical moment as part of this event and as our partners in implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan. And I'm going to start by sharing a bit of background on how we got here. I'm going to share the vision for EGLE, which is not just climate, but we do air, land, and water and everything, but they're all integrated and connected, and talk a little bit about what we want to accomplish over the next few days. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge that today's conference is taking place on Nukwejung, also referred to as Lansing, which is the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Anishinaabe people. These sovereign lands were granted by the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations in 1819 through the Treaty of Saginaw. And through our climate plan, and again here today at the My Healthy Climate Conference, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and we honor all tribes that have a connection to the state of Michigan. It's really an honor to be here. I appreciate the chance to at least touch on the importance of accelerating action to combat climate impacts. And I don't think I have many people in this room I have to convinced of that, but it does feel like every time we have these meetings, it seems like an important moment where we've got to really accelerate what we're doing. And I'm reminded of that by the fact that right now in our state, we have parts of our state, particularly Southwest Michigan, that are still recovering from the impacts of sudden fierce storms. We had the tornadoes several days ago. And I hate to say this, but we are at parts of our state that are already being affected by wildfire smoke in Canada. So here we go again. I think we all saw the impact that had on us and half the country last year. The EGLE meteorologists are staying on top of that and keeping us informed, and I'm sure, hate to say it, but in a few weeks, that'll be a daily part of our update, is what's happening and who do we need to alert. But that's a reality of a changing climate. We all know why it's happening, and we all know we need to be ready to deal with future impacts like that that'll only accelerate. So enough of the morose here. I'm going to try to lift us up a little bit here. Something I'm really proud of is I'm a 7th generation Michigander. And when I took this job, it's been about 10 months ago now, I came into it with a really deep commitment to ensuring we do everything we can to ensure that the things that make Michigan special are protected for now and for future generations. And those are really the people of the state, all of you and all the people that we're speaking on behalf and representing, and our natural resources. And on a positive note, since we gathered last time, I'm really proud to say that we've made unprecedented progress in our fight to mitigate climate change. And I wanted to tick off a few things that we can celebrate. They're not the end of the struggle here, they're the beginning, but all of you should be proud of the roles that you played in this. Since the Lance Conference, I'm going to tick off a few of these, we have leveraged historic amounts of climate resources from the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure laws. We've passed game-changing clean energy legislation that have truly made Michigan a national leader in clean energy. We passed budgets with hundreds of millions of dollars dedicated to clean energy and advanced mobility. We've created and launched now the My Healthy Climate Corps. I'm so proud of that group. Got to be there at the inauguration. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. These are really our emerging climate leaders in the state. And I would say that they're all the young leaders, but they're not. It's a multi-generational thing. We've got people of all ages and all stripes who signed up and wanted to do this, whether earlier in their career or mid-career or late career, to be part of the change here in our state. And so they're serving in various functions all over our two peninsulas, having impact, helping organizations to do their work on climate and so much more. That was launched just recently. In fact, we had one of our leaders from the My Healthy Climate Corps had the opportunity to introduce President Biden at the launch of the Solar for All event. And that was really a proud moment for everybody in our department. We also launched the state's first ever, this was just announced here in the last couple days, the first ever environmental justice impact grants that are going to be used to have direct impact in environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. Again, another effort to center all of this work on justice and equity. And then, earlier this year, the governor released her budget recommendations where she continued to prioritize climate action as she has throughout her entire administration. And I'm just going to list a couple of the things that were in those recommendations and that we're working on getting those passed through the budget process now. Over $15 million to help local governments mitigate and adapt to the impacts from climate change through the installation of resilient infrastructure projects. So much of this, as I'll talk about later, is being able to do things at all levels of government, at all levels of state, and all industry, every sector of the economy in the state of Michigan. So that's going to play a really important role in empowering local governments to start to do that work. $20 million to transition fleets to clean and electric models, and then nearly $50 million to deploy electric and hydrogen charging stations. That's right, we're on to hydrogen now. And so much more I could list. A lot of big accomplishments we can really be proud of. While we have accomplished a lot since we gathered last time, we know that this is just the beginning of our work. And in my tenure as the director of EGLE so far, one thing that's been really clear to me is that climate work, climate action is a team sport. We can no longer stay in our silos, do our little, we all have to do our individual thing, but that's not enough. We have to work together, we have to coordinate our efforts, it all has to be integrated, and we have to be moving to scale impact all at the same time. And that means taking an all-of-the-above approach to climate action. What do I mean by that? I mean, we need to take an approach where we utilize every single tool in our toolbox to address climate impacts. We need to be flexible and ready to address emerging opportunities and technologies that can help us on our way. We have to be in a situation where all of state government departments, all of them, are centering climate change in everything that they do. And I think you're going to see some evidence of that. We're going to have a panel discussion later today where we talk to some state leaders in other departments. EGLE has been doing a lot of that, but that needs to be throughout state government. And we also need to be approaching this in a way where people from all walks of life, whether they're in the advocacy arena or they're policy advocates, or they're in business or they're everyday folks, we all need to be working together and coordinating our efforts. And I'm proud to say in Michigan, we're doing just that now. We work together because we have a common goal: to protect our environment and our public health of our great state for today and for future generations. I've been talking mostly about climate so far, but I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the work of EGLE, which is certainly climate is a big focus of our effort, but it's also air, land, and water, and all kinds of environmental protection. And like the My Healthy Climate Plan, at EGLE, we also have a plan for doing that, a plan for protecting Michigan's air, land, water, and climate, because the public health, the livelihood, and the way of life of all 10 million Michiganders depend upon it. Earlier this year, in partnership with my team, EGLE established what we're calling Vision 2027. That's about how long I'll probably be in office. That's where that came from. It's an ambitious effort and a time-bound vision for what the agency will look like and what impact we plan to help Michigan to have in the next 3 years. The vision for 2027 is to make Michigan a truly enduring leader in environmental protection. What do I mean by that? Well, there are several important words there. Environmental protection, which encompasses a lot of things, but enduring means this isn't a 2-year gig. We're not going to do a few things and then move on to other things, or there's a new administration and they do something different. We want to lock in the kinds of impacts that we're having and the institutional change that we need to make a difference over the long term, because this is a long-term fight that we're in to protect not just our climate, but all of our air, land, and water resources. So what we have done in the last several months is we have taken all of our program areas, all of the areas in which we regulate or we provide, we do work in environmental protection, and we have set stretch goals. There are about 60 of them that we're working on at last count across everything that we do. And we are asking each of our program areas to push a little bit harder. And we're changing the way that we measure success. We're measuring it by, this may sound obvious, by the actual impact that we're having on the 10 million people in Michigan. I don't think it's a novel approach, but we're making it everything that we do. We're about having positive impact. And so we've set goals across everything you can think of, ensuring that Michiganders have safe air to breathe, that we have clean drinking water, that we protect our Great Lakes, our inland lakes, our streams, our wetlands, our groundwater, that we reduce waste generation and we increase state recycling efforts, that we clean up the 26,000 known contaminated sites in our state, and we do it as quickly and as expeditiously as we can, that we reduce the impacts of climate change by successfully doing the work that we're here to discuss, implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan and if anything, exceeding its goals. And importantly, through all of that, we're going to serve as a catalyst for advancing environmental justice throughout the state, through every single thing that we do, and that's been a big priority for our department. EGLE's Vision 2027 seeks to expand upon the good work that's already been done in our department, and it is immense. I can tell you, I'm still learning about all the areas where we're already a national leader, and we're going to benchmark ourselves against other states. We're going to find areas that we could be doing better, and we're going to learn from other states, and we're going to celebrate and expand the things we're doing really well, and there are a lot of them. I'm really excited about the challenges in front of us. I'm excited about the ambition of the 2027 vision and the My Healthy Climate Plan goals, and the chance to confirm what we already know, that Michigan is truly a leader in environmental protection, and it's due to the concentrated and broad-based efforts of everybody in this room and many who aren't. Really appreciate you guys being here at this conference. As a token of our commitment to save energy, the heat isn't working. I wish I could say that was planned, but they think that'll be fixed in a while. So I especially thank you for rolling with the punches. We'll have to be doing a lot of rolling with the punches in years ahead as we tackle this crisis and try to get us to a new and better place. And now I'm going to hand it over to Keith Cooley, who is here to serve as our conference MC. Keith is a business leader and an entrepreneur. He's a public servant and a servant leader. He's the vice chairman of the Michigan Advisory Council for Environmental Justice. He's a longtime climate champion in Michigan, and he's a dear friend of mine. Keith, thank you for doing this.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you, Phil. Phil's actually been kind of a mentor for time to time for me, and someone I can come to when I've had issues to deal with, so it's great being on this program with him. I am going to be the person that sort of is behind the curtain, take you through the nuts and bolts of what's going to happen today, and give you a sense of the speakers that are going to be at the table. As a reminder, the conference is using an event app. Many of you have it, I think, called, Julie, it's Hoover, right? I've been calling it Wova, but Julie is hooked on phonics, so it's Hoover. And you can find out more information about that app on your table. There's a little card. Let me now give you the layout of the center. We're in Exhibit Hall A. The hall over to your left, my right, is Exhibit Hall B, and that's where lunch will be served, a buffet style, a little later today. There's several restrooms off the main hallway. If you go out the back doors, almost right in front of you when you come out, and off to a little to the left and right, you'll see men's and women's bathrooms. There's a breakout panel session set in ballrooms across the way. And by the way, if for some untold reason we end up in an emergency, someone gets sick or hurt, there's a tornado or some other more unwelcome event happens, the emergency exits are out that door there that says exit, out this door here, the one in the back, and whether you know it or not, behind these curtains, there are emergency exit doors. So hopefully we don't have to do that, but they are there in case needs be. So the agenda for the day. We'll begin today by grounding the conference in key considerations for the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. They're grounded in science, health, jobs and economic opportunity, and justice. After that, our keynote speaker for the day will be Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II, and when he's done, we'll make that break for lunch in Exhibit Hall B. We're back at 1 o'clock. We resume our programming in this room with a panel featuring State of Michigan leadership moderated by Director Roos. And then we'll transition to concurrent breakout panels, 2 one-hour sessions. And finally, we return to the room for a conversation with Senator Sam Singh and Representative Abraham Ayash on legislating climate action. When the day is done, there's a reception at the DoubleTree. I think it's across the Skywalk. And after that's done, if some of you are interested, we've been invited to a Lugnuts ball game, sponsored by the Lansing Board of Water and Light. So that's kind of the day. We return tomorrow at 8:45 a.m. for lightning talks on the main stage. And by the way, again, you can find all of this information in the Whova app that you have. Remember, there are no breaks in our sessions, so in the morning programming. So if you feel the urge to take a bathroom break or get a break from what's going on here, please feel free to quietly and discreetly exit the hall for whatever it may be that you need to do. You may hear dishes clanging in the background. That's from the folks preparing our lunch for us, and we thank you in advance for your understanding of that. Finally, if you got a phone with you, set it to off or stun, vibrate. Be engaged with the sessions here. There's a lot for us to do, a lot for us to talk about, a lot for us to engage in, and great ideas that will bubble up from that. If the breakout sessions become too full and you're more interested in networking or checking your email, etc., please do that discreetly again away from those sessions that are taking place. You can use the rest of the center to make that happen. Okay? Let's see if this works. That's a welcome. I want the next one. Keep going. That worked great. Oh. Thank you. That went too far. No, it didn't. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Julie. I'm sorry. So there's a couple sessions kind of like table icebreakers we're going to do. They'll take about 10, 12 minutes at most. The first one is called a section of introduction. So at your tables, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to your neighbors, share what brought you to the conference, what you hope to achieve in the sessions that you think you will find most exciting. We're not going to share with the entire group. You share amongst yourselves for about 5 minutes or so. We'll come back and we'll have the next session, okay? So, go. 5 minutes. Set my time. I'm going to say we've got till 22.
Yeah. Perfect. Yep, they're bringing it. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I was nervous about the noise.
All right, let me call it at this point. Hopefully you've had a great time talking with your friends. Thank you. I had another tabletop activity to get you involved in, but it seems that our morning is slipping away. So instead of us going to that, what I'd like to do now is to bring our first speaker to the table, or to the lectern to speak with us, Peter Sinclair. This first talk of the day is meant to ground our climate action in science where we are in 2024. Peter Sinclair is a creative director of Greenman Studio and a videographer specializing in climate and energy issues. For 12 years, Mr. Sinclair produced a monthly video series for the Yale University School of Environment and has interviewed, worked with, and traveled with, and learned from hundreds of the world's leading scientists and engineers. As media director of the Dark Snow Project, an international crowd-funded science communication initiative, Mr. Sinclair has embedded with scientific teams in global climate hotspots focusing on the Greenland ice sheet. He posts frequently to his internet page, think.blog, and is a consultant to the clean energy developers throughout the Midwest. And in 2017, the National Center for Science Education recognized Mr. Sinclair as a friend of the planet, and we do here too. Mr. Sinclair.
Okay, is this mic working? Got me on? Good. Okay, so this first graph, pretty much what you think it is. Michigan is warming, maybe even a little bit faster than the rest of the planet. But for a lot of people in Michigan, this has been kind of an abstraction, something they thought was happening somewhere far away or maybe in the distant future up until maybe a year ago. This is the view from the webcam at the base of the Mackinac Bridge on June 27th of last year. That is the smoke from Canadian wildfires that we were all choking on at that time, and this probably brought it home to a lot of people that climate change was going to be something happening a lot sooner and hitting a lot harder than what they might have imagined. And for anybody that thought that Michigan was going to be some kind of a climate haven or climate refuge, I have some cautionary notes. This is the cumulative daily wildfire emissions from Canadian fires over the last 20 years. These gray lines over here, each one is a summer season. The dark is the mean or the average of those years, and this is 2023. So this is consistent with what scientists are telling us, that the climate models, insofar as the global temperature, have been very accurate, spot on, as a matter of fact. But what they're not capturing is the intensity of extreme events when they happen like this. And we're seeing extreme events that are starting to break both natural and human systems. We know that this past winter was abnormally warm and dry, and the Canadian government has told us that they expect it's possible we may be facing another catastrophic fire season. And already this week, we've seen fires out of control in Canada and air quality alerts happening across the upper Midwest. Now, a group of researchers at University of Michigan looked at this idea of climate havens or climate refuges recently, and they noted that the states that are supposed to be climate refuges have some of the highest projected temperature rises between now and mid-century. And already many of these places, like we've experienced, are seeing significant powerful storms and flooding that seem to be increasing. These are states that are seeing widespread damage to the energy grid and heightened risk of waterborne disease outbreaks, and that's because we have a legacy infrastructure, often aging, of electricity transmission and water infrastructure in particular. So that makes us uniquely vulnerable in that regard. And insofar as just the last 2 weeks, we've seen storms that are seemingly out of the norm for what we see in Michigan. Now, tornadoes are tricky, they're tough because they're small and they're short-lived, and climate models find them hard to resolve, and we don't have a long enough record of good Doppler radar observations to really make that strong link to climate change. But still, we saw Michigan's first ever tornado emergency just last week. And my friend Jeff Masters put it pretty succinctly. We're seeing tornadoes at locations and at times of year that we're just not used to seeing them. The one thing that is not controversial is that we're seeing more heavy precipitation events. Even in places where the annual rainfall is not increasing, we're seeing that rain come in sharper, more intense events. And those events are washing additional pollutants and nutrients into our rivers and lakes and streams and creating the conditions for algae blooms. And when we have those algae blooms, we're starting to see organisms that we have not seen in the past because this guy is called Cylindrospermopsis. It is a form of blue-green toxic algae that was formerly considered only extant in the tropics and the subtropics, but now it's surviving in the Great Lakes region. And so when we see these algae blooms, as we frequently do in Lake Erie, they can threaten local water supplies, as they did Toledo's not too long ago. What's really concerning is that Lake Superior, which has been traditionally pristine, is starting to see these kind of blooms. The first one was in 2012, and we've seen them almost every year since. Another form of vulnerability that we see was highlighted in the quarterly earnings call, third quarter earnings call last year from Consumers Energy. And CEO Garrick Racho said, over the last 20 years, we've seen an increase in both the frequency of storms and higher wind speeds, some of the most extreme winds in the last 4 years. We're clearly seeing the effects of climate change. And as an example, he showed that the design standard for the transmission system was 40-mile-an-hour winds. Now that's been changed to 80-mile-an-hour. So we're all going to be paying for that if we want to maintain or improve our electrical transmission system. The other kind of infrastructure that is important is the economic infrastructure. And many of you have probably heard that in places like Florida and Louisiana and Texas and California, that insurance companies are dropping people from their home insurance rolls and even fleeing the state in some cases because of extreme storms and wildfires. You should know that that phenomena is happening here in the heartland as well. Bloomberg pointed out recently that Michigan expects to have about a 14% increase in home insurance costs this year. So game that out over a decade. And if and largely because of an increase in the natural catastrophes. And if maybe this week you saw this incredible article in the New York Times, it's linked at my blog, by the way, insurers around the world, around the US, are bleeding cash from climate shocks. And they point out that in 2023, home insurers lost money in 18 states, including Michigan. That's up from 12 states 5 years ago and 8 states in 2013. So again, sooner, harder, faster than we imagined. Without insurance, banks won't issue a mortgage. Without a mortgage, most people can't buy a home. With fewer buyers, real estate values are likely to decline, along with property tax revenues, leaving communities with less money for schools, police, and other basic services. We're also seeing impacts on the cold water, lakes, and bodies of water that are really part of our DNA here. By mid-century, more than half of Michigan's 300 high-quality cold water lakes will no longer be categorized as such, including familiar names like Higgins, Charlevoix, torch and crystal lakes along with trout streams across the state. Winter, we know, is warming at least faster than any other part of the year. We know that Great Lakes ice coverage is declining rapidly. Climate change is erasing Michigan winters, taking our heritage with them. We don't realize how much it defines us until it suddenly vanishes. And as far as the marketplace verdict on what is happening, Yamaha is set to exit the snowmobile business in the next year, calling it an unsustainable market. So they've been listening to climate scientists. Now, I took this picture on March 23rd after we'd had 2 snowless months, and we finally had 2 inches of snow, and I was lucky enough to get out into it in that kind of crystalline hush that you get after a snowstorm that is completely familiar to all of us that maybe grew up here, but I fear is becoming an anomaly that our children won't understand. Those losses, if they affect you the way they affect me, like a spear in the chest, you understand the sense of urgency that I have about this transition. And we're moving rapidly under Governor Whitmer's leadership and with some courageous votes from legislators on a suite of climate bills that was passed last year. And if you look around this room, you'll see some of the most important people for getting this transition done. We've taken some bold steps. They say if the goals that you set don't make you a little bit nervous, maybe you're not setting high enough goals. I'm a little nervous, but I'm also excited. And so I'm looking forward to working with you, meeting with you, and sharing ideas over the next 2 days for how we can make this transition happen. I'll start. If you take out your camera or take out a pen and get these URLs marked down, sun101.org and wind101.info, they are meant to be resources that I have created to push back on the tsunami of misinformation that is our biggest obstacle. They're meant to be shared. Come back again and again to share them. I need allies to help me do this. Repetition is good. I'll keep adding to this if I can find some other people to keep sharing them. Additionally, you can follow me at thinc.blog. And if you're still on what's left of Twitter, I'm at Peter W. Sinclair. So I look forward to meeting with you, learning from you, and being inspired by you over the next few days. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Am I on? Yeah, okay. Again, our thanks to Peter for information that, yeah, it does make us a little bit nervous. We hope that we can get it fixed quickly. Next, let me see if I can make this thing work. Hey, how about that? Let's next take a look at linking climate action to the complex issues of health. Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian will help us do that. She is the Chief Medical Executive for the state of Michigan. She's board certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine in Internal Medicine and Infectious Diseases, and she is a fellow of the Infectious Diseases Society of America and the American College of Physicians. Dr. Bagdasarian completed medical school at Wayne State University, an internal medicine residency and infectious diseases fellowship at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. She received a Master's of Public Health degree from the University of Michigan School of Public Health. She serves as an adjunct faculty at the University of Michigan School of Public Health also. Dr. Bagdasarian is a member of Governor Gretchen Whitmer's cabinet She chairs the Michigan's Public Health Advisory Council, Childhood-Lead Elimination Commission, and the Opioid Task Force. She's also a member of Michigan's Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities. So, without further ado, Doctor, please.
Can everyone hear me okay? Apologies for my voice. I am recovering from a touch of bronchitis. I want to just share with you today some stories, some data from the field that talks about the link between climate change and what we're seeing with infectious diseases. Now, we know that climate change can pose a variety of health risks. And the previous speaker mentioned some of these. We've got algal blooms, we've got smoke. There are lots of ways that climate change is going to impact our health. Now, in Michigan, whether or not we want to call ourselves a climate safe haven, we are spared from some of the things that are being seen around the globe. We are not as prone to things like droughts, water shortages, but there are things that can still affect us here in the Midwest. And I want to talk about some of them really briefly. We've got temperature, heat-related illness. We've got the air quality concerns, the wildfires from Canada and the smoke that brought. We've got extreme events. When there's flooding and our infrastructure can't handle that that amount of water, we can end up with sewage in our water systems. And then we've got vector-borne diseases, and this is where I want to spend some of my time today. Now, the hosts of this amazing conference said I could talk about whatever I wanted to, and I'm an infectious disease doctor, and so I'm going to take you on a very short trip with me. We're going full nerd, and we're talking about some of these infectious disease consequences of climate change that we are, in fact, already seeing. Now, there is a poll that you can use on your app if you want to. But I'm going to start out with a story about what happened to me on Sunday, March 31st at 6 a.m. So it's a Sunday, 6 a.m. I have a 9-year-old son. I don't know if anyone in the crowd has a child of that age. They insist on waking up early, waking up the whole family. And I woke up at 6 a.m. to screaming, yelling, "Mom, there's a tick on me." Now, number one, it was very early. And number two, it was March. So I put the covers over my head and I said, "This is not a tick." Then my husband started yelling, "There's a tick on him." So we went, inspected my son's leg, and lo and behold, there was a tick on my son's leg. We extracted it. Here is a picture of the actual tick. I'm sorry I did not have the forethought to take a picture while it was still attached. The whole thing was really gross. It was wriggling as I tried to pull the tick off. And does anyone know what kind of tick this is? Anyone in the audience a tick expert? B, yes, this is a black-legged or deer tick. It is a female adult, and it was fairly engorged when I pulled it off. Now, why do we care about deer tick? Deer ticks in Michigan can transmit Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease can start with things like fevers and rashes and then progress to things like myalgias, muscle aches, joint aches, and it can even progress to things like carditis or heart involvement. So Lyme disease is a big deal. And there's a whole complicated life cycle that if this was an infectious disease crowd, I'd go into a little bit more in depth. But essentially, these are ticks that are feeding on different kinds of animals, rodents, as well as deer. And if they happen to attach to a human, they can transmit Lyme disease. Now, when I was in training as a young infectious disease doctor back in the early 2000s, this is what, okay, I don't think my laser pointer's working, but that top left map, that's what Lyme disease looked like in the United States. And so we had a million things to memorize as infectious disease fellows, and Lyme disease was not one of them. We didn't have to worry about it because we essentially did not have Lyme disease in Michigan. So when someone would call with a tick question, it was very easy. We don't have Lyme disease. Now, over the years, Lyme disease has spread, and you can see down that 2022 map, we are now a Lyme disease endemic state. This is what the curve looks like for Lyme disease in Michigan. So you can see this has been a rising trend. That small decrease, or that decrease that we've had in 2022, who's to know whether that will last? So we'll continue to follow these trends. But this is what the state distribution looks like. We went from having a little bit of Lyme disease on the west side of the state to now, essentially, we are seeing Lyme disease in almost every single county in the state. Why? Why is this happening? Number one, we're having increased temperatures, milder winters, there's more vegetation, there are more deer and rodents. They are interacting more. As a result, we have more ticks. And then we have increased human contact. And a lot of this has to do with the way that subdivisions and buildings are encroaching upon their natural habitat. So there's just more interaction between these ticks, the animals that they feed on, and humans. Now, the other part of my Lyme disease, or my tick story that I thought was really puzzling was this happened in March. And if we take a look at this map, this is a map looking at Lyme disease onset in the US. You can see that back in 2008, the greatest number of Lyme disease cases were seen in July. And now when we look at Lyme disease in 2022, it's moved back to June. So we're seeing a whole shift in this weather pattern and how that's impacting vegetation and rodents and deer and ticks. Now, if we look at that 2008 graph, it used to be that in March, there was barely any Lyme disease. And now when we look at that 2022 graph, you can see that, yes, there's a fair bit of Lyme disease in March and April. So what happened to me was not outside of the norm. It was just part of our new normal. There are many other diseases that can and will spread as a result of climate change. So we talked about one example of a vector-borne disease. So that's when things like mosquitoes and ticks can expand their range and transmit disease more efficiently to humans. But there are some other factors that are contributing to increased infectious disease threats as well. So we've got increased human-animal interaction and warmer temperatures. I'll talk a little bit about the warmer temperatures piece. Now, has anyone here seen The Last of Us, the HBO show? So you are familiar with cordyceps, and the fact that cordyceps, the organism in the show, was based upon a real fungus that impacts ants. The zombie ant fungus. It doesn't really turn them into zombies, but it is a fungal pathogen that causes essentially a fungus to change an ant's behavior and grow inside of an ant. Now, that's not happening. We are not heading towards a zombie apocalypse. But I do want to note that the science behind this is correct. That we know that as temperatures increase, fungi, are becoming better adapted to warmer temperatures. That means they're expanding their range. And as environmental temperatures continue to increase, they're also going to be able to adapt better to living at human temperatures, human body temperatures. So there is increased risk for fungal pathogens too. Now, I'll give you an example of something that happened here in Michigan. Has anyone here heard of blastomycosis? A few of you. Great. Blastomycosis is an endemic fungal pathogen, meaning it is a fungal pathogen that is endemic to the state of Michigan. It lives here and transmits here on a regular basis. It's something that causes pneumonias, and it's something that causes atypical pneumonias. So when someone comes to the hospital with a pneumonia and we can't figure out what it is, it's not responding to antibiotics, we sometimes think about fungal pneumonias. And this is one of my trump cards. When I'm in the hospital consulting on complex patients and I want to look very smart, I say, have you thought of blastomycosis or histoplasmosis? So now you know all my secrets. But blastomycosis, we just have a handful of cases every year in Michigan. It's not very common. And in 2023, in Michigan, we experienced the largest outbreak ever recorded of blastomycosis. Now, blasto likes to live in dead and decaying materials. It loves to live in wood, decaying wood. It loves to live in the leaf litter. And in fact, another one of my tips for appearing smart is when I'm seeing a patient where I think they may have blasto, I ask about their dog. I say, how's your dog? Has your dog been sick recently? Because a lot of times, as people are out walking their dogs, the dogs are the ones who are in the leaf litter inhaling the blastospores. So sometimes a sick dog is the sentinel hallmark of a person developing blasto pneumonia. Now, what happened at this paper mill was absolutely unprecedented. The largest outbreak before this had been about 50 people. And clearly, there were some blastospores that got into some wood pulp material, and that spread probably in the ventilation system. The exact cause of the outbreak is unknown. But opportunities for fungi like blasto to live and proliferate and be more successful as the climate warms up, it's a very real possibility. And I think that this trend, of course, is not going to continue. We're not going to continue to see hundreds of cases of blasto every year in Michigan, but there is the potential for more of these types of events to occur as the climate warms. Now, the last change that I want to talk about is how zoonoses could potentially be impacted by climate change. Now, zoonoses are diseases that are spread between animals and people. And anytime there's a change in the animal and human interface, there's a greater likelihood for diseases to spread. I don't know if you all remember a little virus called COVID-19, started as a zoonosis most likely. One example, and I could give many, many examples, but just one example of a zoonosis in Michigan is rabies. And rabies is something that we typically think of in bats, but in Michigan, we're actually in a belt where we're seeing a lot of skunk rabies. And did you know, show of hands please, because I did not know, did you know that people keep pet skunks? People know this. I'm impressed. This is an actual quote from the website that was breeding these skunks. They said, "We do all our own descenting, so they come ready and fresh as a daisy for you." I'm actually considering getting a pet skunk after this. What happened was, this was a breeder of skunks where their domestic skunks were interacting with wild skunks. And then the wild skunks were interacting with other wildlife. And so one of these bred domestic skunks developed rabies, and you can see here as the interface between humans and animal species and other animal species changes, there's more likelihood for zoonoses to transmit. And I just want to say that we are also, when it comes to infectious diseases, we are impacted by things that are happening on the other side of the world. Ebola is not something that typically is found in Michigan. But when there are outbreaks happening in other parts of the world, we're at risk for receiving those cases. You can see here, this is a look globally at Ebola cases and how those outbreaks are becoming more common as that human-animal interface shifts. And in 2014, when there were the largest Ebola epidemics happening on the other side of the globe, we ended up with 3 cases diagnosed in the US. Not a coincidence. We are impacted by things that are happening elsewhere. We are not an island. And I think when we are talking about climate change, and especially the infectious disease impacts, we have to realize and recognize that we're connected, and we're impacted by things that are happening far, far away. I will just end by saying that we are already starting to see the infectious disease impacts of climate change. We're already seeing it. It's here. I want to just put in a plug for public health, because I work for public health. We need a well-resourced public health system to monitor trends and advise the public of changing risks. Things are not remaining static. 20 years ago, I was telling people that there was no Lyme disease in Michigan. Now, I'm removing wriggling ticks from my son's leg in March. We also need cross-agency collaboration to approach this from a One Health perspective. And One Health is really this idea that environmental health and animal health and human health are all closely intertwined. And you cannot have healthy human populations without healthy animal populations and without a healthy environment. So we all need to work together. And I also just want to thank you all in this group because you are clearly individuals who care about this issue of climate change and who are tackling the underlying problems. Because of course, without tackling those rising temperatures and changes that we're seeing in our world, we won't be able to attack some of these infectious disease issues. Thank you very much.
Our thanks to Dr. B again for a really interesting talk. So we've talked science, we've talked health, and now grounding our climate action in jobs and economic opportunity. To speak to that will be Dr. Lara Skinner. She's the Executive Director of the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. She's also nationally recognized as an expert in the labor and employment impacts of climate change, clean energy policy, and the transition to a low-carbon economy. Under Lara's direction, Cornell has designed jobs-led climate programs for 8 U.S. states and helped form coalitions composed of labor unions, elected leaders, environmental organizations, and industry experts in states like Texas, Illinois, New York, and Rhode Island. The Labor Leading on Climate Initiative, now the Climate Jobs Institute, is the academic and educational partner of the Climate Jobs National Resource Center. Skinner is a founding and current board of directors member for the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, so let's bring her up and have her share her information with us, please. Dr. Skinner.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Keith. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at the conference. It's my honor and pleasure to be here. As Keith said, my name is Dr. Lara Skinner. I'm the executive director, the founding executive director of the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And we founded this brand new institute at Cornell University last year, just over a year ago. And we established this institute because we knew that nearly not enough attention was being paid to the workforce jobs and economic impacts of climate change. As we make this transition to a low-carbon, climate-safe economy, how do we minimize job loss and economic downturn, and instead of that, retain and grow high-quality jobs that sustain our families and communities? How do we expand equitable access to these high-quality jobs for frontline communities of color? And how do we build a more fair and equitable and vibrant economy than our current one? These are the questions that we're looking at. Climate change is often perceived as purely an environmental issue, maybe a technical or scientific issue, but not a social, economic, or jobs issue. And as you heard from the previous speaker, there are major health implications of climate change. I would say that climate change is a public health crisis. And similarly, climate change is likely the greatest social, economic, and jobs issue of our time. And that's why it's wonderful to see that Michigan and the My Healthy Climate Plan has really prioritized jobs, workforce development, and economic opportunities. It's an important feature of the plan and Michigan's work on climate change. It's really important to remember that the transition to a low-carbon, climate-safe, clean energy economy is hard. It's historic, it's a massive transition. It requires changes, shifts, and disruptions to almost every single sector of our economy. In energy and electricity, it means producing more of Michigan's electricity from low-carbon sources, at a time when electricity demand is expected to nearly double over the next couple decades. Greater demand for electricity, plus the new variable sources of power like solar and wind, will require a drastically improved, upgraded, and expanded transmission and distribution system. Peak load in Michigan is expected to be 40% higher in summer and winter in the next decade. In manufacturing, we have to figure out how to produce the building blocks of our economy, concrete, steel, glass, plastics, other things, without releasing carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. These are high-heat, energy-intensive processes that are currently done by burning coal, gas, and oil. In the building sector, Michigan has more than 3 million buildings, schools, factories, homes, apartment buildings. They all need to be retrofitted for energy efficiency, solar, EV charging, and more, and a fraction of these buildings have been retrofitted so far. Transportation, one of the greatest sources of emissions in Michigan. Reducing emissions from the transportation sector will require a massive improvement and expansion of public transit and an expansive, dense charging infrastructure that can support the transition to zero-carbon vehicles. The way we produce food, how we deal with waste, all of that will have to change too. So these are big changes, and making this transition is hard and historic, and yet we have to find a way to do it. We know this. Climate scientists tell us that this decade, from now until 2030, is the most important for us to make these shifts and reduce emissions in order to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change. But it's not as simple as turning off what we currently have, flipping a switch, and turning on the new. A tremendous amount of new infrastructure needs to be built before we can make that switch. And there are serious jobs and economic implications to this transition that present both major challenges and major opportunities for Michigan. On the jobs and economic side of this equation, many of the industries that face major changes and shifts are also the major economic drivers in Michigan currently and around the country, and they support many families and communities. These include energy and electricity, auto manufacturing, building and construction, energy-intensive manufacturing and industrial activities. All of these sectors will see changes. For example, in the electricity sector, building a coal, gas, or nuclear plant employs thousands of workers for multiple years to build that plant. And then after the plant is built, hundreds of workers operate and maintain that plant. In contrast, building a solar or wind farm requires far fewer workers, a couple hundred at the most during construction over a several-month period, and hardly any workers to operate and maintain them once they're built. This is not an equivalent number of jobs on both sides of this transition. The same is true in auto manufacturing. Michigan is home to the UAW. The recent strikes brought to light the importance of the transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. The UAW's historic wins means that electric vehicles and battery manufacturing will be covered under UAW's master contract. This is a huge win. And the fact remains that manufacturing an EV does not require as much work as manufacturing an internal combustion engine that runs on oil and gas. So job loss in this transition is real. We can't deny that. People have already lost jobs in this transition as plants have closed, and even more job loss could happen, which is devastating to workers, families, and communities. We don't have a social safety net in this country that protects workers when they lose their jobs. When the Indian Point nuclear plant in New York closed down, not only did thousands of workers lose their jobs, but the local community lost $30 million a year in tax revenue from that plant that paid for schools, libraries, teachers, transit, local government. These industries often anchor whole communities. These plants often anchor whole communities. The other piece of this is job quality. Job quality is also a major issue in this transition. Will the new jobs in the clean energy economy be high quality, well-paid jobs with good benefits that truly sustain families and communities? Will these jobs be union, which in the US is the best way to ensure that workers have the collective voice and ability to bargain good wages and benefits, training opportunities, safety, and much more? Currently, the unionization rate in the fossil fuel sector is much higher than in solar and wind. Union density for coal, gas, and nuclear power plant workers is well over 20%. 20% of the workforce unionized, a little bit more. By contrast, it's between 3 and 7% for solar and wind workers. A recent study that we conducted at the Climate Jobs Institute on working conditions in the New York State solar industry found that the majority of solar installers on small-scale projects were paid piece rate. So they were paid by the number of panels that they were installing per day. They were paid in cash, and many of them experienced wage theft. Those are not high-quality jobs. Those are not the type of jobs that we want to create as we build out this new clean energy economy. And this transition will only be just and equitable if there are high-quality and ideally union jobs for workers to transition to. So, in fact, I think we're actually solving for 2 crises, not just one. We have a crisis of climate change that we need to address, but we also have a crisis of inequality that we need to address. Inequality of income, wealth, power, race, gender, hope, and opportunity. And inequality in Michigan has been increasing significantly since 1970. As we design and implement climate policy, we need to ensure that we're designing policy that also confronts inequality and builds a stronger, fairer economy. And history has shown us that one of the best ways to address inequality is by creating high-quality jobs, strengthening unions, and ensuring that there are expanded and equitable pathways into these careers for frontline, historically underrepresented communities. And that really is the promise and opportunity of this moment. Too many people are struggling to make ends meet at the same time that the impacts of the climate crisis are intensifying. As we build out the clean energy economy we have the opportunity to build a stronger, fairer, more just and vibrant economy than our current one. On the upside, building the low-carbon, climate-safe economy we need will take a lot of work, a lot of jobs, and it provides Michigan with the opportunity to lead on so many aspects of clean energy and clean energy manufacturing. In Michigan, you need to build about 50 gigawatts of new low-carbon power and retrofit existing plants between now and 2040. It's a tremendous amount of work. You need to double the capacity of your transmission grid and distribution system by 2050. You already have district heating systems in Detroit, Lansing, Grand Rapids. These systems can be retrofitted, decarbonized, and expanded throughout the state. It's a utility-scale approach to heating and cooling buildings that creates a lot of work akin to the existing gas system. You need to go from having just over 1,000 EV charging stations to installing 100,000 by 2030. You have 3,468 schools around the state that emit 2 million metric tons of CO2 per year. These schools could be upgraded for energy efficiency, solar, made carbon-free and healthy for students, teachers, and staff. And as cloudburst or heavy rain events become more common, upgrading Michigan's water and wastewater infrastructure will be essential as well. Most estimates project that building the clean energy economy will create between 10 and 20 million new jobs in the US over the next 20 years. Just focusing on these elements that I just mentioned above, related to wastewater, solar, wind, low carbon power, the transmission system, could create over 1 million jobs in Michigan. The job creation aspect of this transition is massive. And with federal programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, CHIPS, and more, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to supercharge the build-out of the new clean energy infrastructure that we need. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, nonprofits like local governments and schools can have half the cost of a clean energy or climate-safe infrastructure project paid for, completely paid for. With these job creation opportunities comes the importance of ensuring these new jobs are high-quality, family and community-sustaining careers. We can't build out a generation of low-wage, low-quality jobs that exacerbate inequality. We need these jobs to be good jobs that allow workers, families, and communities to thrive and drive economic prosperity across the state. And we need these jobs to be high-quality jobs that help right historic wrongs in our economy and society. Most ideally, these jobs are union, because unionization improves wages and benefits for all workers, not just those in unions, and is especially helpful to reducing racial and gender wage gaps, particularly because about 2/3 of union members today are women and people of color. The IRA is also important on this front in making sure that these jobs are good jobs, that there's equitable access to these jobs. Businesses can receive up to a 50% tax credit on climate-safe projects if they pay prevailing wage, enter a project labor agreement to ensure good wages and equity, use domestically manufactured products, in their projects and locate in an energy or environmental justice community. Michigan made good progress on job quality and the job aspects of this transition in the last legislative session. Renewable energy credit bonuses are provided for employers who use in-state workers. When approving the Integrated Resource Plan, the Michigan Public Service Commission must require that construction of new or existing capacity resource is completed with an in-state workforce, uses a registered apprenticeship program, pays prevailing wage, and enters into a project labor agreement or collectively bargained agreement where it's legally possible to do so. In the state's new siting and permitting bill, solar projects over 50 megawatts, wind projects over 100 megawatts, and battery storage projects over 100 megawatts require community benefit agreements, the payment of prevailing wage, as well as project labor agreements and collective bargaining agreements where allowable. These are great starts. Of course, many solar and wind and other clean energy work will be smaller scale. Down in the residential sector, and these jobs need to be good too. So your current standards are covering the bigger stuff. We still need to think about how do we cover job quality on the smaller scale projects. About 10 US states are now requiring prevailing wage on any renewable project above 1 or 2 megawatt. In New York State, project labor agreements are required on all offshore wind projects. Labor peace or neutrality on clean energy manufacturing is essential too. Across the clean energy economy, much of the work and the jobs in the manufacturing supply chain for electric vehicles, solar, wind, small modular reactors, heat pumps, et cetera, that is where the majority of jobs are, in that manufacturing supply chain. The Inflation Reduction Act doesn't require labor peace, a provision that requires employers to stay neutral in workers' efforts to organize and improve their working conditions. But individual states can add a labor peace provision to their support for clean energy manufacturing and ensure that there is labor peace attached to that work. These labor and equity standards are essential to making sure that the new jobs we are creating are high quality, family and community sustaining jobs that help build a prosperous economy in Michigan. They also ensure that workers that are negatively impacted by this transition have comparatively good jobs to transition to, because there is no just and equitable transition if there aren't good jobs to transition to. And workers and communities will be negatively impacted by this transition. Some industries are and will phase out, and we need to make sure that these workers and communities who powered Michigan's economy for many, many decades are well taken care of. Have access to replacement wages, continued benefits, opportunities for retraining and relocation, and have priority hiring in new industries. As I said at the beginning, this is a big, hard, and historic transition that we're going through. We must tackle climate change at the pace and scale that science demands, and we also have to recognize that we need to use this transition as an opportunity to build out a more fair, just, and prosperous economy. With attention to the jobs and economic impacts of this transition, Michigan can protect the good jobs that it currently has, make sure that those are retained and protected, expand high-quality union jobs in the new economy, make these good jobs accessible for frontline communities, and make sure that Michigan leads in building a clean energy economy that maximizes job creation, creates good union jobs, and builds a strong, thriving economy for all Michiganders. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to meeting you all and talking more in the next couple days. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Skinner. I think we'll have a lot to talk with you about at the breaks. Okay, the last piece is on justice. And we have 4 subject matter experts who are going to come and spend a few minutes with you on that subject. If it's okay, Regina, if you can come up as I mention your name. Okay, first is maybe the moderator, Regina Strong. She leads the EGLE's Office of Environmental Justice and Public Advocate, so come on up. I know you want to be here when I get done. Then Donna Givens-Davidson. Is she here? Oh, great, thank you. President and CEO of Eastside Community Network. I probably should know you. It's probably Detroit. Great. Sylvia Orduño, organizer, Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. Oh, there she is. She says she's an organizer. She is. She does a great job at that. But I'm her wingman because she's president of the Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. And Kareem Scales. Where's Kareem? Oh, good. Thank you. He is board co-chair for community collaboration on climate change. So please, the floor.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Are you hearing me with this mic? Good morning. Okay, we can do better than that. I am raised Baptist from a call and response background. So when I say good morning, you say? Good morning. Thank you. I feel welcome now. I appreciate it so much. So you've heard a lot this morning about climate change, all the things that are happening, but nothing is more important than the impact on people. And that's why we're here to talk about environmental justice and how it relates to the work all of you are doing to address climate change. Because at the end of the day, why we're doing it is all about people. I'm excited to have an amazing panel to talk with you this morning, to have frank and open dialogue about what we need to consider over the next 2 days and as we move forward. But I also wanted to give you a little background on environmental justice in the state of Michigan. I'll start by saying the Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate was created by Governor Whitmer when she took office in 2019 by executive order. That executive order also included the creation of an interagency environmental justice response team because we really wanted the whole state of Michigan to be thinking about how to integrate achieving environmental justice in the work that they were doing moving forward with this administration and beyond. In addition to that, soon after, I'd say within that first year, what we realized, looking back at some of the recommendations that had come through both advocates as well as task force convened by the 2 previous administrations, we really needed to have an advisory council on environmental justice. Some folks who could help advise the state, but also from varying sectors that impact how environmental justice is achieved. So that advisory council, you'll hear me affectionately call it the MACEJ, the Michigan Advisory Council for Environmental Justice. One of the things you'll learn about me as I talk is acronyms are hard, so I like words. So I turn long titles into words. So the MACEJ has been convened since February of 2020. And if you think of all the things that were happening in 2020, there was a huge in-person meeting convened with some of the members of the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team. And then COVID hit in March of 2020. And right away, that advisory council had an opportunity to immediately advise the state. There were a lot of emerging issues that came from COVID, as we all know, and several of those opportunities proved right away that having an advisory council, some folks who are on the front line of the water issues, folks on the front line of the air issues, folks on the front lines of those issues, as well as folks in labor, folks in industry, academics, all became part of this advisory council. So I just wanted to give that as a backdrop. I will also say that over the last 5 years, it's amazing that it's been 5 years, but over the last 5 years of this office existing, we've moved forward to set the groundwork for addressing and achieving environmental justice. But we all know that injustices are not that easy. You can't wave a magic wand. You can't just throw money at it. But all of those things working together can help improve the lives of people across the state. And so I am so excited to have the 3 individuals on this stage with us today who are working every day to make lives better for folks across the state. I am going to start both by introing them briefly, letting them talk about the work that they do in their respective organizations and the advocacy that they lead, and then tell us a little bit about why that work is so important to environmental justice. So I am going to start with you, Sylvia. Sylvia is the chair of our Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. She's part of the People's Water Board. She's an organizer extraordinaire. She is working with welfare rights organization. She's an immediate past chair of the National Advisory Council, or the NEJAC, for the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So Sylvia, welcome to the panel, and please tell us more about your work.
Thank you very much, Regina. Are we speaking from here, or are we moving up? All right. Well, thank you all. It's an honor and pleasure to be here, especially with these wonderful folks I know have been doing amazing work over the years, and to be in this space to talk about these issues. I appreciate, I think in particular, that EGLE has seen the importance of making this conversation that we're all participating in. It's not just sort of put in a separate workshop, because these issues really do underlie what we believe are the purpose of having these kinds of convenings and conversations, but also about how we have to do important priority setting. Many of us have been working in this space for lots of years, have had some ongoing criticisms, I think it's fair to say, about how the work is done, who's being engaged in that conversation, where the resources are going, how priorities are being set. And so it's important for us, I think, to, again, have this grounding conversation about how we do this work. And so, again, thank you again for that lovely introduction, Regina. I come at this work from the space of being a long-time community organizer with Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. It's an anti-poverty organization that came out of the 1960s in the civil rights movement, right, when a lot of people were trying to figure out how do we also ensure the rights of poor people to be able to participate in programs that benefit them, but also ensure that programs are effective in what their needs and issues are, and be participants in how those solutions are addressed. And so from that space, again, I really appreciate what Dr. Skinner was sharing, because it really has to be part of how we have these conversations. Many of the issues that directly impact a community's experience are from that place of not having adequate resources, of not having living wage jobs, of not being able to enter the workforce in ways that help build for careers, not just some kind of short-term wages, and the benefits that go along with it that I think it's fair to say the majority of folks in this room enjoy. And so they're not conversations that we want to have about class disparities, along with the economic and other environmental problems that we want to address here today, but they are very much part of what have to be part of the conversation. Back to the MAC-EJ in particular, what is very important, I think, is that the governor and lieutenant governor made this very much part of the beginning of their administration in the formation of the MAC-EJ, and we very much appreciated that. And those of us that were part of this inaugural cohort of that group, serving since 2020, have appreciated participating in that space, but we also had criticisms of how it was formed and the way in which the charter was drafted. So one of the things that we did in the first couple of years was say, look, we've got to look at the charter for how this council was established and make some adjustments to it by way of who was going to participate and how we were going to engage. One of the things that's been a problem with how it is that impacted communities participate are the processes themselves. And one of the things we had to make clear that if you're going to do any kind of environmental justice work in the name of EJ, it has to also be about the process, not just the convening of a space. And many of us have problems with the way that process has been happening, right? So what we did were build improvements in the charter itself so that we felt it could be a more equitable space for the advocacy that we need. So that was an important thing from the beginning there. One of the things that we've also been doing in that space, and we've been fortunate again to have directors that are leading EGLE that are also open to having these conversations and reflecting on how it is that they do the work in the administration. And thank you, Director Roos, for all of your leadership on this particularly, is that we've got to also ask questions about how it is that state and local governments are doing work in the name of the people. When permits are being approved, when land acquisitions are being offered, when tax credits are being put forward, when other ways that private sector and even governments are being allowed to operate and do business with the state, those aren't always in the benefit of impacted communities. And we've got to be honest about what that means when we don't agree or there's not alignment between what it means to be part of a body as a council or what it means to do engagement with communities that is highly inequitable and where the processes themselves are broken. I can tell you as someone who's been participating for many years in public hearings and spaces where you're allowed to give public comments, those spaces of 1 to 3 minutes is wholly inadequate. And it shows a lack of respect and a lack of understanding about what meaningful public engagement means. And by that time, we also know that a lot of times decisions have already been made. And so it's a formal process where whatever board or body is coming forward in that public hearing space that they're required to do has the public comments, but we're not changing anything. Certainly not decisions, nor hearts or minds. And so we've got to be better about what it means to do meaningful engagement, because you're constantly leaving behind communities. Resources are going not where we need them to be. Priorities are not being changed, and communities are not being heard.
Thank you. I'm going to try this. Can you all hear me on this mic? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sylvia. We're also joined by Kareem Scales. And Kareem does a lot of work in the Grand Rapids area. He wears many hats, but one of those is the co-chair of the Community Collaboration for Climate Change. Did I get it right? I always mess it up. Called the C4. So, Kareem, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your work and who you are.
Sure. Thank you all. Good morning. What a pleasure it is to be here. I want to thank you, Regina and Mac EJ, for allowing me to serve alongside you all. As mentioned, my name is Kareem Scales. I wear a number of hats, but for the purpose of today, I am one of the board co-chairs of C4, which stands for Community Collaboration on Climate Change. I'm going to share a little bit of history about C4 and touch on some of the things that we're working on here currently in Grand Rapids. And so C4 was started back in 2019. It was an initiative that was first presented to myself and others in the community on behalf of the city of Grand Rapids. And so the original vision was they identified a gap, right? And I'm sure this isn't new news to you all, that too often in environmental spaces, there aren't people who look like us at those tables. And so C4 was developed by our Office of Sustainability to engage community-based organizations with municipalities and historical environmental organizations to come to one table and address these environmental climate justice issues. And one thing I'll say, just to kind of set the stage, is I think too often when we separate environmental justice and climate change, and in our work, we don't see them as two different issues, right? You can't address one without the other, and those same communities who are most disproportionately impacted by environmental justice are also the first and worst in terms of climate change. And so we have to make sure that we talk in that respect. And so, as I mentioned, C4 was created back in 2019, and we spent a good amount of time really building the framework for what we're doing today. I mean, we spent close to a year really just identifying who should be at the table. We went as far as to even writing in our bylaws that it's mandatory that we have representation from different ethnic groups, that we have representation from the differently able community. We don't even meet a quorum if folks aren't present in the meeting. And so we really took the time up front to really establish that equitable framework to inform all the work that we do. And so C4 was established in 2019, and we really launched our efforts back in 2020. One of the things I'm really excited about at C4 is our Community Ambassador Program. And I'm not sure, we may have ambassadors in the audience today. If you're here, please stand or raise your hand. But our ambassadors are at the core and at the forefront of all of our work at C4. They are our eyes and ears on the ground. They are the residents who are directly from these disadvantaged, underserved communities. And so we source them. We actually pay them a living wage. We provide them with education and training. And then they're out in the community talking with their constituents, identifying what issues are at the forefront. And so through the ambassador program, I think we have about 15 ambassadors that represent all different various ethnic groups, class, you name it. And one initiative that we're really passionate about at C4 is our ambassador mini grant program. And so every ambassador has the opportunity to apply for a small $5,000 mini grant. And so I know $5,000 won't remediate the issues of EJ that we've experienced for decades, but what it does is it allows them to dream, right? And it allows them to draft their own climate justice solutions in their own communities. And we've seen major success in that. I think too often individuals who come from outside communities trying to place solutions onto them. And so this ambassador mini grant program kind of reorganizes that whole landscape. And so we're empowering them directly. They get the funds and the resources to do the work. We've seen some really exciting projects. I mean, some stuff that even I was surprised about. One of our ambassadors is merging the worlds of esports and gaming and climate change issues, right? I know at face value, you're like, what's the connection there? But what he's doing is he's speaking directly to his constituents in a way that they understand. He had an esports competition. They powered the whole esports competition with solar powered generators, right? Partner with other local organizations to make sure that all the cutlery was compostable. And then there's education throughout the esports competition to talk about environmental justice issues. So it's about meeting folks where they are. We also work closely with the City of Grand Rapids and the Office of Sustainability on the development of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And we're still in the process of working closely with the city. So we're at the intersection of community empowerment, doing political advocacy, and really just centering the voices of those who've been, unfortunately, most disproportionately impacted for far too long.
Thank you so much, Kareem.
Thank you.
So Donna Givens-Davidson is the CEO of the Eastside Community Network with a long history of doing work in the community. Donna, can you tell us more about you and your work?
Sure. We were founded in 1984 on the east side of Detroit. Have a few east side Detroiters with us today. And in 1989, the largest incinerator in the United States was built in our footprint. And we did nothing. Also during that time period, I don't have the exact dates, but U.S. Ecology opened not one but two toxic waste storage sites in our community, and we did nothing. DTE had a coal burning plant in our community, and we did nothing. We have lived alongside these environmental injustices for years, and it's impacted our health for years, and we've done nothing. So I want to start with that by saying that one of the challenges is that people who live in places like ours learn to coexist with toxins, believing it will help the economy, believing it will help good jobs. So in 2019, Chrysler, now Stellantis, announced plans to expand its footprint in our local community by doubling the toxins, the volatile organic compounds going into the air, and offsetting that doubling by reducing the number of toxins in a suburban plant. Now, mind you, there was already one plant. They didn't say we're going to reduce the number in this plant to accommodate the increase in this plant. They said, nope, we'll just do it over here in Warren. And that was permitted. It was rushed through by the mayor and city council, rushed through. Actually, there was a community advisory committee, and they were told, listen, if we don't do this really quickly, we're going to lose the opportunity for 5,000 good jobs. And so everybody hurried up and did that. They removed the Connor Creek Greenway, which is a street that had a grassy berm, trees, bushes, and provided a green buffer between the plant and a residential community on the other side. And so at that point, we got activated around air quality issues and environmental justice. We've been working in green infrastructure, but this is where we got activated. We got to do something. 2020, we had the, coronavirus. We ended up with COVID-19 and everything that we were doing to adapt to that. 2021, we had significant floods where over 30,000 Detroiters were flooded. And on the east side of Detroit, there were two communities, two pumping stations that failed during July 21st. I believe that's the date, on July 21st. In 2022, the city of Detroit permitted the same corporation that had taken on this street to transform some green space that was sandwiched in between two neighborhoods that have recently been declared flood zones. Some green space next to the Connors Creek pumping station is one of two that failed, and turned that into a 40-acre trucking facility across the street from one residential neighborhood and just down the street from another, where one truck every minute enters this facility, and the idling of those trucks produce all types of greenhouse gases and diesel pollution that makes it impossible for people who live across the street to open their windows. So as we talk about all of the gains and we talk about green jobs, I want to talk about what's actually happening in communities like ours, because this is what environmental racism, this is what environmental injustice looks like. Good talk here and this stuff here. We know what the science is, and we do it anyway. So, I get emotional about this because when we talk about environment, we talk in climate, we talk about protecting the air, the water, and the soil, but we have to get about the business of protecting the people. And if the people in our communities are okay, I promise you the air will be okay. Because the people won't be okay if the air is poisoned, if the water is poisoned, if the soil is poisoned. But as long as we're willing to keep on poisoning the people because it makes economic sense for some people, then we're going to continue to damage the climate for all of us. So I want to frame what we do in that way. That this is not for us a theoretical future fight. We're not thinking about 2030. We're thinking about the average life expectancy of people who live in this footprint right now compared to people who don't right now. And people who live in this footprint don't have time for our incremental approaches. And yeah, we know it's kind of bad for you now, but in the future it'll be good. We need to do something right now. So we're activated on the basis of this idea that you change what you can. And through that, we work in two areas around climate justice. One of them is climate adaptation, where we are working to help our community understand what's going on with the climate and adapt appropriately. Through that, we have a cooperative weather station on our site, where we're monitoring water in our community so we can better understand when it rains, how much rain does it take for it to flood here, because there's a belief that it takes less rain. We're monitoring air quality. We are helping our young people. We have young people who are wearing wearable air monitors, and we have other people in the community wearing them so we can track how air quality changes in places. We also are engaging in, we have energy efficiency upgrades. We do about 100 homes a year, upgrading the homes to help prevent, some of the impacts against heat and protect people from poor air quality. We do home repairs, replacing roofs, foundations, and also for some homes, we actually had a pilot project where we installed backflow preventer valves and rain gardens on homes. A lot of our work is focused on climate mitigation, helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change as it is, understanding that we can't change what is. So we have a lot of green infrastructure that we have helped to facilitate, a lot of green infrastructure planning so that we can figure out how to leverage some of our vacant land to address some of the flooding that is taking place. We have a Climate Action Coalition, and our Climate Action Coalition is working to raise awareness of issues and promote policy change, including, clean air, including stormwater management. And towards that end, we actually have a watershed management planning effort underway where we have a postgrad who's working out of our office. We have a sustainability fellowship. We train people, regular folks in the community, to understand all of these issues and then equip them with some grant money, not as much as $5,000, but $3,500. We give stipends during the year, and then we give about $3,500 in fellowship grants. We just started a youth fellowship so we can bring young people into this process, and the goal is to make sure that no new incinerators without us saying nothing, no new green U.S. ecology without us saying nothing, and no new plants coming into our community without us raising such a big voice that our policymakers have to listen. So I'm really excited about that work. And then finally, we are doing things around transit. Well, two things. We're doing things around transit. So we do believe that if you're really going to address climate change, you can't keep on doing the same thing. An electric pickup truck is not necessarily a good climate change solution. We need to electrify our buses and our public transit and get more people onto public transit, get more people biking and walking and using non-motorized transit so that we can protect our air quality most. Because even when you are using an electric vehicle, you are using somehow, there's air pollution and producing that electricity, especially in our state, which is behind the curve. But we also have an electric vehicle car share, the first in our city, where we are trying to look at car sharing as an opportunity for people to make sure electric vehicles are accessible to the lowest income people in the state, not just for those folks who can afford it. And also, we're looking at whether or not an electric vehicle car share could be part of a public transit continuum. Sometimes you need a car. Sometimes a private vehicle is the most efficient way to do it, and so that's another thing that we do. But all of these things are done to change what we can, while we are also trying to change what we at this point cannot, and that is our overall approach in our state to environmental justice.
Thank you so much, Donna, Sylvia, and Kareem. All right, let's get to some of our questions. So, Kareem, I heard you talk about the importance of using people in the community as part of your work. How did you find the folks that you're working with, and what have you learned in that process?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Regina. How do we find the folks? I think the first thing I would touch on is the importance of having authentic relationships with those who are on the ground in the community, right? One of my mentors often talks about proximity. And so we've been blessed enough at C4 to have individuals, a part of our leadership team of directors that represent organizations like NAACP, Urban Core Collective, the City of Grand Rapids. I can keep going on, but these are entities who are already in those underserved communities and have the relationships. So we use those trusted partners to help us recruit and identify individuals to help support that work. And I just want to make sure that I echo that I think too often we see these things and they happen and they're super transactional, right? You can't just come to the community and ask for folks to serve on a committee or to join a workshop. Those relationships have to be intentional. And like I said, we've been blessed to have individuals, a part of our leadership team of directors, as well as our project coordinator. And a lot of our representatives from C4, like myself, wear multiple hats as well. And so we're sourcing those individuals from the other spaces that they're in to identify who should be at these tables and provide them with the opportunity to serve.
Thank you so much for that. Sylvia, I know you've done a lot of water advocacy work. And in the early days when COVID hit and we were dealing with water emergencies, and how do you see the role Mackie J was able to play intersecting with your advocacy on what to do when you have to wash your hands to stay safe and you don't have water?
Thanks for that, Regina. There's a couple ways to come at that. And again, with my history of experience on this, I can tell you all, I've been working on water affordability since 1997. And it's been a hard fight, especially in such a water-rich state, right? We've got these inherent contradictions about how we're addressing water security with residents in the state, but against many real needs that our local water utilities are experiencing. And so part of the way of addressing that is how we're looking at both the climate issues against the environmental justice issues. And Kareem is totally right about we can't look at them separately, but we really have to look at how people are impacted in those ways. And I appreciate the data slides and the photos that we were shown by some of the earlier presenters, because they show the visible pictures of what that looks like as something that we're all experiencing, right? When the smoke is coming down from Canada and we're pulling out, those of us with asthma are pulling out our inhalers, right? And trying to figure out how we mitigate some of those harms. But for a lot of communities, the harms are not temporary, nor are they novel. When we talk about environmental justice, we also talk about the history of problems the legacy issues in communities that are not experienced by everyone. And that's part of the honest conversation that also impacts some of the issues around water in particular. The pandemic gave us very much an opportunity to have a shared experience that I don't think any of us fully understood at the time, but that we all experienced. But we had different levels of experience on that. So again, when we're talking about how communities are impacted, where we've got to set priorities and understand impacts, we had a lot of people that didn't make it through the pandemic because of existing health problems and harms that they had been experiencing, particularly in communities that had been harmed by pollutants and contaminants and not having adequate health resources, or the impacts, again, and I'm going to keep pushing on this, by what local, county, and state governments are doing to be contributors to these problems. And so we often want to look at what it is that the private sector is doing for investor-based utilities or other developers or operators, but we also have to look at the ways in which government itself is a contributor to the problem, and in many ways is not responding to the needs of all residents, right? I don't even talk about citizens, because we've got people who are not citizens but are residents and have to also be included in those conversations. And so for water in particular, what we saw that even before the pandemic, we had severe injustices taking place in our local communities where people who could not afford to pay for water had their water denied to them. And it's not because we didn't have in many municipal governments the ability to deliver water to any house. What we had was a problem with people unable to pay the rates and bills that were being charged to them, because local governments have to pay for the operations, maintenance, upgrades. We get all that. But there's been a disconnect in terms of understanding the role of water utilities as public health agents. This is really why water systems were formed in the first place. So we go back to early civilization and why sanitation systems were set up. But we've lost that connection and importance in modern times, as we've now been telling people, if you can't afford to pay, then you can't have it. And we've got to get back to an understanding of the public health role that local government is responsible for, and what happens when we don't address it. The pandemic showed us that if you don't have water, and early on we had no vaccines. We remember those days, right? We didn't know what we were facing, but we were all being told, you got to wash your hands with soap and water. But in communities where the water had been disconnected from households that couldn't pay, this was a serious health consequence. And it didn't affect just those households. When we're talking about frontline workers who had to go and work at the grocery stores, where people were going in and trying to scoop up whatever they could, or fast food workers, or people working any kind of frontline job at the hospitals or clinics where people were going for immediate medical care, you can't ask people to then be able to do their job if they can't protect themselves back at home. But these are conversations we haven't really been willing to have, but are very necessary for understanding the scope of the problem. So I've been working again on these water issues in many levels and trying to figure out how we can do better to engage government as solution makers, as we also engage the private sector in these problems. But it's been a hard space to work because we're not wanting to appreciate and assuming that communities have nothing to offer in return, right? And so we can't be a part of the solution-making spaces in addition to just having that meaningful engagement. And so what ends up happening is we have people that continue to suffer the consequences, and then we end up trying to figure out, well, then what are our other solutions? People have turned to unlawful options out of desperation and then charged with crimes for those sorts of things. It's nothing new to tell any of you all here about what happened in Flint. And after 10 years now, recently commemorating that awfulness, right? We still are at a point in the state where we haven't addressed that in full. People are still struggling. People are still don't trust. And how is it that all of this money has been spent on lead service line replacement, and they won't drink the drinking water, right? Don't trust government. And we still have a whole host of problems, Legionella and other things that came out of that people are trying to understand about what it means to manage public health. And so we've continued to figure out what is it that we need to do as EJ advocates, what is it that we need to do to have better allies and advocates in the larger communities and spaces that can help us make these connections. Because Every one of us in this room are responsible for these problems, but not everyone is feeling that they want to step up and address them. We've all got our sort of spaces in which we work, but if we're not addressing these issues as public health issues, then we're all missing the ball here.
Those are really good points, Sylvia. Now, one of the things that happened during the pandemic was having the MAC and EJ in place was really important to moving forward and immediately addressing the water need that
Yes.
you brought up, ultimately leading to Governor Whitmer doing a moratorium on shutoffs during the pandemic.
That's right.
That was driven by having folks at the table who could say to us, the state, the things that Sylvia just said.
And to the governor's credit, she was the first governor in the nation
Yes.
who said, we're going to issue a moratorium, we're going to restore anyone whose water has been disconnected, and she provided immediate relief. The legislature stepped up and provided $25 million too, to help with people who had large arrearage bills that were also impacting local government's ability to get that water restored.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And Donna, I'm going to connect this a little bit to your work. I know that ECN does a lot of things in the community, and this is one part of that work. But when we were having kind of our pre-discussion, and we were talking about what achieving and getting toward environmental justice really meant to you, you talked a lot about the importance of policy. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because sometimes we have scientific amnesia. We knew that water was important for public health.
That's right.
When the water systems were first established in the city and they first made them public after the first water system in Detroit in the 19th century was actually private, and the Detroit Water Board was established because of the number of deaths from communicable diseases at that time. We understand the significance of indoor sanitation to public health. There's always been that correlation. But unfortunately, we sometimes have amnesia for reasons I don't really understand. Like, I don't understand why people think it's unfair for a low-income person to use water they cannot afford and say, well, that you have to pay your fair share, but a corporation can owe millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and use water they don't pay, and then redistribute the profits to their shareholders. So I don't understand how we say that. Water is a human right.
That's right.
And public health is a human right, and we got to treat it as such. You know, when I look at this nation and I look at the Bill of Rights, when I look at even the mission of, say, EGLE, I really appreciate, Regina and I go back, right, years, but the mission of EGLE is to protect Michigan's environment and public health by managing air, water, land, and energy resources. I don't see anything in this mission about facilitating industrial demands or interests. The Detroit City Charter actually has a Declaration of Rights that the people have a right to expect aggressive action by the city's officers in seeking to advance, conserve, maintain, and protect the integrity of the human, physical, and natural resources of this city from encroachment and or dismantlement. And I just described dismantling and encroachment to you just a few minutes ago. So my issue is this: we know what we say we're going to do, but we are not going to change any of this until we really start to reevaluate this government, all of the U.S. government. I'm not just talking about Michigan because it's the U.S. government, the EPA, and all of our regulatory agencies and their relationship to industry over people. Because until you put people first, we're going to have these problems. If you put people first, we wouldn't have to worry about any of this, okay? There's no place where water is being poisoned where people are not dying. There's no place where air is not being poisoned where people are not dying. There's no place where soil is not being polluted, where the water is not being poisoned and people are not dying, and people are not sickened, and people are not bearing the brunt of our current, social organization. So it starts with policy. So I have a couple of questions, like with Stellantis, with all of these air quality violations. By the way, after they built it in 2020, I think they opened it, there have been 10 air quality violations and counting. People have stopped even reporting it because why bother reporting something that will not be addressed, okay? But what is causing these violations? Is it the building of the engines? Is it the assembly? It's the paint. It's the toxic paint that we are still using in 2024. We can send people to the moon. We can even talk about Mars, but we can't figure out how to manufacture and mandate non-toxic paint on cars. It's ridiculous. If you look at the vehicle exhaust that is killing people and causing the most harm, it's diesel fuel, which, by the way, is still leaded fuel. We're talking about electric vehicles. How about non-diesel trucks? And I've read, why is it? Because, well, it's more efficient to use diesel fuel. And industry wants diesel fuel because industry wants efficiency, even at the risk of human health. It's those kinds of policies that says, not just people in Detroit and these communities don't have to experience it, but nobody does. When I look at environmental justice, it is definitely, bigger, because justice is a universal thing. We all deserve justice, whether we're citizens or not citizens, whether we live in the rural communities or cities, whether we live in concentrated Black communities with historical patterns of segregation, whether we live in immigrant communities with historical patterns of segregation, whether we live in Appalachia with historical patterns of Appalachia, or in a Navajo Nation with historical patterns of segregation. We all have human rights. Justice is one of those things that should thread it all. And I think because we are not really looking at it from a justice standpoint, we don't understand that we're all being poisoned, really. That all of us are dealing with. There's people in rural communities who don't even understand environmental justice and don't think it's about them, whose well water is being poisoned right now. There's people who are so excited about having a new battery plant, but we haven't figured out how to make sure that the production of these batteries does not poison where they live. We've got to get in this fight together, and we've got to fight together because we experience justice unequally, but we're not going to get to justice unless we figure out how to have an equal say and how we equally participate in the process and quit otherizing the issue. So for me, I think there's so many policy issues. There's the cumulative impact of poison air. We know what it is. The science is there. Why is it that, and just two more things. Why is it that I, as a citizen, have to prove that the reason that my mother died is because the poison air that you knew was likely to kill her? Why do we have to prove through all of these actions? And we actually received something from EGLE saying that we know that there is a high asthma rate, we have the highest asthma burden in the state in our footprint. We know there's a high asthma burden, but we can't necessarily correlate that. I mean, there's correlation, but we don't know that there's causation between all of this industrial activity and asthma. But science tells us we do. And so we put the burden of proof on people who are dying, people who are the poorest people who have the least access to attorneys, people who have the least political power, and say the burden is on you to prove that what we have done is causing you pain. And I think that that's problematic. And I guess I'll end there, but I just think that we have to look at it.
Thank you, Donna. Sylvia, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah. I think one of the difficulties in this space, and especially like when EJ folks like us are here presenting in spaces like this, is I'm oftentimes trying to figure out how to keep my cool, right? How to present in a way that is acceptable. And I appreciate that you're bringing that energy, because there's a lot of reasons why I think we should be talking about what's not working. There's a lot of hope, and we should be looking at that. There's a lot of potential, but let's be honest here. There's not a lot of people that are interested in justice, right? There's evidence for that everywhere. And so I think what we're asking for in the state of Michigan is that for all of you who are here doing this work, really do believe in that change is necessary and that there are serious inequities, but that you're in a space where you can make a difference. You're a person who's got a value set and a set of principles and beliefs that make it so that you can actually figure out how to create the changes that we need for everyone. That's not something that I think everyone is willing to bring into these spaces, because let's be honest, there are profit motives that are oftentimes at odds with justice. And we recognize that. We're not naive to any of this, but I think part of it is like many of our communities are tired of being angry on top of being sick, right? Tired of being the people that are complaining and sometimes having to beg for respect, dignity, and health, when that should not be something that, at least as Michiganders, we should tolerate anymore. I'm hoping that going forward throughout this conference today, that you will at least be moved to reconsider how it is that you've been doing your work. Rethink how it is that you want to see the changes for greater equity, if not justice, at least some basic line equity. And so part of that means about thinking how you're doing your work right now. Who's at the table? Who's in the conversations when you are doing this work, and who's not? Why not? And many times, even for this conference here today, how many people could not get here that would have liked to be here because it's in Lansing, right? It wasn't in some local community. It's not even being transmissioned in ways that people can find accessible. The information will not be sent out in ways that people can also find shareable. But we've got to find ways to do better in Michigan to be more engaged. And part of at least driving towards justice means that we're changing the ways that we've been operating. And so let me tell you that for many of us that have been doing this work for a long time, because we're not getting the results that we need in different ways, we end up taking to direct action. We end up suing our local governments and the state, federal government, wherever we need to, working with legal advocates that say, look, we can't keep allowing this to go on. There's huge inequities, there's injustice, there's civil rights violations on top of all the human rights issues that we don't even acknowledge in the United States, right? There's no human rights in the United States. Many of us are pushing for it because it's just what you need for life, for every aspect of life. But we can do better, and I'm hoping that that's what we'll be pushing ourselves here to be doing today.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Kareem, please.
Really quickly.
No? Yeah, I'm going to give you time. I know we have passion across the board, so go ahead, Kareem.
I just wanted to comment and just kind of echo some of the sentiments from my colleagues here, specifically on the political advocacy front. And so we understand that that is at the forefront and at the core of getting the change we need to see. Is there has to be transformational legislative change, right? But what we've found also in our communities is that's just one piece of the solution. Once we pass legislation, there has to be a plan for oversight and accountability. And I'll give you an example. In Grand Rapids, several EJ advocates came together, I think back in 2020, and we got together on an initiative specific to semi-truck traffic that's going through a predominantly BIPOC community in Grand Rapids. So it's called Granville Avenue, right? And so over a period of, we go over there and you know, there's great food, and you could stand there for 2 minutes and there's probably 10 semi-trucks going up and down the street. And who stays in those communities? Black, brown, underserved folks. And so we were successful in applying pressure and organizing and getting legislation passed to strengthen some of the truck ordinances in that community. But we saw no change because there was no plan for compliance and oversight. And so I just want to uplift that to you all, that the legislative piece is extremely important, but it doesn't stop there, right? We have to make sure that we're following these issues along the path and seeing it through. And then also, just to kind of piggyback off of some of the things you touched on, Sylvia, as well, is, this is tough work. It's taxing work. And to your point around this space being, let's just call it what it is, a space of privilege, right? I'm sure many of us have been privileged enough to no longer reside at least in close proximity to these at-risk communities. So I just want to leave you all with, or at least add to the conversation, that it's our responsibility, every single one of us, to take this information back to our communities and identify who are those folks that can be a part of this important work. So
Yes.
I'd just like to
Thank you so much for that. Real quick, Donna, and then we'll get to our next question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, policy is not just the law. It's the practice. It's the enforcement. It is the interpretation. Right now, there are many things that some of us in the environmental justice movement believe fit within the law, but are not the policies and practices in our state and in our cities. And so it's not just changing the law, it's changing the mindsets and changing how we measure success. Because if success continues to be corporate growth, jobs without looking at the type of jobs and green jobs and stuff like that, then we're never going to get to the kind of environmental justice. So I just wanted to agree with you, Say, and just put a pin on that.
Thank you so much for that. So we've heard a lot about the injustices that are happening. This is a kind of a popcorn question, so I want you to share with me and share with us what makes you hopeful about how we address environmental justice as we move toward addressing climate change. I'm going to start with you, Kareem.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that make me hopeful. I think the first thing I would touch on is I've seen an increase in collaborative efforts, right? I think in the past, we've always seen these organizations trying to tackle these issues in their own silos, and I would say over the last couple years, specifically at C4, we've been extremely intentional about bringing other folks to the table, right? And so I think we're seeing a shift where folks are recognizing their collective power, and that's exciting. That's something I'm super excited about. And not just on a local level, right? I think, often we operate in different silos from east side of the state to west side of the state. And so C4 is a part of a cohort under the organization Fourth Mobility called Toward Equitable Electric Mobility, where we've had the pleasure of working with folks across the state. ECN is a part of that group as well. And so I'm excited about the collaborative efforts. I'm excited about the collective power. Obviously, we're excited about the influx of financial resources that are on the table, but there's still a lot of work to do, right? And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Same question, Sylvia.
I am hopeful for the spaces like this that are doing this kind of harder work, I think, to have that engagement. I'm also pleased to see that many of our communities are trying to figure out how to better engage with government, right? Not just describing problems, but how to be part of those spaces where you learn how to participate in changing the rules and regulations and laws, right? The harder part is, as Donna was saying, is how to get enforcement around existing rules, right? And at least in the city of Detroit, for many years, we heard even around the water issues that there is not adequate funding or resources to implement even existing ordinances, right? That's wholly unacceptable. That's saying to us, we're not going to enforce laws, and the only way it's going to happen is if you make us. And making you ends up meaning we've got to sue you or find some way to get the resources there for those ordinances that are on the books, right? And that's wholly unacceptable. But there are ways, I think, in which more advocates are working in ways that they haven't in the past. And I can tell you that, like in the water space, but particularly in connecting environmental stewardship and water conservation, a lot of those folks that have been traditionally big greens have been trying to figure out how they can be better allies and students themselves of the directly impacted issues that come out of problems with the tap, right? Either the quality or access or affordability itself. And so there are a lot of people that have been trying to figure out how to come out of the spaces that they've been working traditionally and work to not only align with, but help resource up impacted communities. And I know we're gonna have a lot of good workshops today. They're gonna be talking about Justice 40, but let me just say right now, that's a heck of a hard space to be working in too for the implementation of it, right? And so part of that means not talking about any more trickle down. That trickle down just does not work. But right now, we're seeing some of that with the intermediaries, right? So we've got to figure out how to change up some of that so that more of a strong stream is coming down, right, into our frontline communities. And so there's a lot of hope in that space. And I think lastly, it does matter the type of administration that we have in the state. It matters to have the legislature that we do. And so right now we've seen a lot of legislation getting passed that is helping our communities, but at the same time, the politics of fear are still real, right? People that don't want to lose their seat, people that are trying to figure out what their next career move is, and those are all real issues, but at the same time, they can't keep being removed from what we need to do to protect our communities from real harm and perpetual problems.
Thank you so much for that. Donna, same question. What makes you hopeful?
Young people. I think that anytime you want to have real social change, young people have to be behind that social change. When you look at women's rights, when you look at civil rights, when you look at LGBTQ rights, when you look at immigrant rights, you'll see young people at the forefront of those movements because they're the ones who are willing to really change the way we look at things and not just make incremental change. Young people have a way of seeing the world as it should be before they get old enough to start seeing the world as it is and start becoming real practical. And so take the risk, and just have the energy. And young people today, more than any other demographic group, care about the climate. It's real personal for them. Young people aren't certain they're going to grow up in a climate their children are going to have a future. Their grandchildren are going to have a future, and we owe it to them to stand behind them. So I'm really excited to have 10 young people from the Eastside of Detroit. I think we brought 10 or 11 with us today. Who wanted to come. We didn't make them, we didn't do anything. They wanted to come and be part of this conversation, and they're only a subset of the people in our community. I also want to say that I'm really, really appreciative of those people who are in elected office right now who will fight the good fight. I want to talk about Donovan McKinney, Abraham Ayash, and Stephanie Chang as 3 people who have stood out in our community, representing our community. Not the only 3, so I left you out, my apologies, but we have a lot of young people. And also the fact that despite any criticism right now, there's people like you, Regina, who are working on justice issues and really trying to understand right now what it is and what needs to happen. So I really appreciate your role and the fact that you're bringing us these conversations, and frankly, the fact that you invited me to the stage to have this conversation, knowing that I'm going to be real challenging, speaks to the willingness of this state to hear truth even when it's uncomfortable. So I want to thank you, and also all of the activists who've been fighting this fight. Sylvia, you've been doing it for a long time. Donnell Wilkins has been doing it for a long time. Teresa Landrum has been doing it for a long time. You guys have paved the way for the rest of us to step up and step out. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Joanne Watson as one of the initiators and one of the most important people, Monica Lewis Patrick. So many people in our state are passionate about these issues, but all of us have to be led by young people.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I wanted to, in this last couple minutes, give you all an opportunity to do a call to action. What can folks do to help us narrow the gap and move forward? So I think we have, did you put the sign up for me yet, Jen? We have 4 minutes, okay? So quickly, can we just go by and say, what is a call to action? What can people do? Sylvia, I'm going to start with you.
I'm going to say it. Again, this is part of the legislative need that we have, but it's also very much tied to the work of EGLE. I'm the director of the People's Water Work Coalition, and right now we're leading the work for statewide water affordability legislation, the creation of a statewide program, the need also for a statewide fund. We can't keep separating out what we've done for energy to be different from what we need from water. And in the state of Michigan, we have to create the human right to water. We need to be a national example for what is necessary. And if we can't do it here, we've got some serious problems with all of what we've been talking about regarding climate and environmental justice. So that is the call to action I'm asking you all to get involved with.
Thank you so much. Donna.
Build coalitions, work together. Together we can, we are stronger together. We need statewide action, and that means I don't care where you live and what part of the state, figure out what your part of this movement is, because you can't fix the problem by focusing on one geography. Michigan is a large state with 2 peninsulas, and all of us are impacted by the same thing. So let's work together.
Thank you so much. Kareem, you get the last word on that.
Sure, thank you. And Donna, you took the words out of my mouth. I think I'm just going to continue to push that collaboration, cohorts, coalition. It's extremely important. We've been blessed. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize some of our other partners around air quality in Grand Rapids, our partners at Just Air who are in the room, if you can definitely raise your hand. And so I think it's extremely important that you all identify who are those folks who are already doing the work and provide them with the resources. And I'll leave you with this. I know there's a lot of talk around workforce development and green jobs, and that is extremely important. But what we're big on is green entrepreneurship. If we don't address and empower new entrepreneurs to engage in this space like Just Air, then we don't address the wealth gap, then we won't address this issue of environmental justice. And so collaboration is going to be key to the shift.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Can
you,
you all
Regina.
join me in thanking this amazing panel?